Ladies and gentlemen, in news that sounds even difficult to believe, 16 flights over the last 72 hours have received bomb threat hoaxes over the past 3 days. It's too long to even read out the list of these 16 flights, so we're going to put them out at the bottom of the screen with the details of each of these 16 flights and counting in the last 3 days. Today alone, 6 flights were targeted, including 3 from IndiGo, 1 from Akasa Air, and 2 from SpiceJet. One of the SpiceJet Airlines had already faced, from Darbhanga to Mumbai, had faced a disruption yesterday itself. It's the second time this particular flight is facing that problem in 24 hours. Yesterday, 7 flights faced similar threats, while on Monday, 3 international flights operated by IndiGo had received hoax calls. The airlines, as we said, there are 5 airlines so far: Air India Express, IndiGo, Akasa, and SpiceJet. All affected flights have landed safely, have been diverted, or have been returned to their departure airports. And the causal effect of this has been mayhem. Hundreds of passengers have had their schedules disrupted. Many have had to wait overnight. Many have had to deal with diversions. Some of them have been senior citizens, some of them traveling with children. Flights have been, for airlines, it's been a logistical nightmare. And they've been forced to reschedule flights, not to mention first check whether every flight is safe. Now, in response to these incidents, a Rajya Sabha panel convened a crucial meeting, deeming the situation to be very serious. The government has reported that some suspects have been identified, and in a significant move, they are planning to double the number of air marshals on flights. Additionally, high-level meetings in Parliament also took place. The Rajya Sabha Standing Committee on Air Transport also met and got briefed from key stakeholders, including officials from the Bureau of Civil Aviation Safety. Now we've gotten the first official statement coming in from the Civil Aviation Minister amid a spate of bomb threats to airlines. The Aviation Minister has come up with his first statement. Ram Mohan Naidu has just tweeted that the government is monitoring the situation closely. He's also said that he is condemning the attempts to compromise safety, and that one minor has also been detained for threatening 3 flights, and that the safety of passengers is of utmost priority. That's the first statement coming in from the Aviation Minister, Ram Mohan Naidu. Let me go across to my colleague Nikhil, who has been tracking that story for the past several days in detail, especially today as well. Nikhil, the first statement coming in from the Aviation Ministry, but what we've seen today is also a multi-pronged response, whether it be the DGCA, whether it be the Aviation Ministry, whether it be even the Delhi Police. Take us through some of the responses that have been put into place today.
Well, too little, too late. This is the statement to begin with, because now, for the very first time, Minister of the Civil Aviation, Ram Mohan Naidu, he has come out with a statement officially on record, wherein he has expressed his concern with the incidents currently being reported in the aviation sector. At the same time, he has confirmed that a minor from the city of Mumbai, he has been arrested by the Mumbai police. And this is something which has been clearly mentioned in the detailed statement, that he has not been detained, he has been officially arrested. And this is the minor person, and the efforts are being made to nab the other accused as well, because there were other threats as well which were issued in the last few days, not just to the airlines but also to the airport operators as well. And the person, the minor who has been arrested so far by the Mumbai police, he issued threat to 3 of the airlines. So there are a lot of other things as well which needs to be done. Apart from it, what we are learning, that there were some of the social media platforms which were being used for allegedly disseminating this particular misinformation, so to say, about the hoax calls, which were initially posed as a security threat to different airlines. So these handles have also been identified. They have been suspended following the same, and the efforts are being made to check if there are other handles as well which are equally active to create this kind of problem. And apart from it, we are learning through the sources placed highly in the Delhi police as well, that they have also registered official FIR against the matter which was reported earlier today as far as the Akasa flight is concerned. Now, this was QP1323, which was bound to Bengaluru from the Delhi airport. It had to return to the place of the departure, that is at the Delhi airport, and after the proper checks and thorough inspection, it was safe for the further journey. But now there is official FIR which has been registered from the side of the Delhi police in the relevant section of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Apart from it, what we are learning, that in the last 10 days, there are 6 of the legal action which have been taken so far from the side of the Delhi police. Apart from it, 1 minor person has been arrested by the Mumbai police, and Earlier today, we got to know that a teenager was also detained from the side of the Chhattisgarh. Rajnandgaon was the area. So there are a couple of efforts which are currently being made. How much impactful it is going to be, that is something which is still we need to discover about it, because this is happening at a time when the aviation industry usually sees the peak of the passenger. This is the time when people are traveling from one place to another. Most of them are either going for the vacation, or there are some of the other people as well who are usually reaching out to their hometown during the festive season. So the threats which are coming at this particular time, this is making it even more concerning. So a crucial meeting were held back to back inside the parliament, where all the major stakeholders, including that of the BKS, DGCA, and the officials from the MHA, they were equally in attendance. So how much impact these steps are going to be, observed, that is something which we will get to know in the days to come. Back to you.
All right, Nikhil, thanks a lot for that detailed response that sets up the debate. Thanks a lot for joining us. And now let me go across to my guests who are joining me. We have Sanjay Lazar, aviation expert and CEO of Avialaz. We have Jitender Bhargava, former ED of Air India, Colonel Denny, who is a retired defense expert, and Pawan Diggal, who is one of the foremost cybersecurity experts. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me. Let me start with you, Mr. Lazar. The first question that comes to my mind is there any way we can stop falling for this again and again? Now, Air India put out a statement yesterday, and you could almost sense the helplessness from the statement, saying that even though every call so far has proven to be a hoax call, we have no option but to treat every call as a potential truth, because we cannot take any chances with safety, especially when it comes to the safety of our passengers, safety of our crew. So does this mean that the system is now vulnerable for anyone who has no job, who has a perverted desire to just cause mayhem and just get some kicks out of it, to just put an anonymous message on Twitter through an anonymous handle and then sit back and enjoy while absolute chaos unfolds and hundreds of people are inconvenienced?
Thanks for having me on your show. Good evening. And I'd like to first point out that, it is the inevitability of aviation, given that we've had such disasters in the past, like you mentioned in the run up to your program, Kanishka, where I lost my entire family incidentally. You had Lockerbie, you had the TW, you had, bombings in the past. There is an SOP for a bomb scare, which every airline in the world follows. Air India is no exception, and they've done the right thing. I can sense their frustration as well. Yeah. I can also, looking at the unprecedented wave we've had in the last 72 hours, 15, threats or hoaxes, there is no alternative. The pilot in command has to divert. They follow, SOP. You sensitize, you sanitize the aircraft, you screen it. That's the inevitability of aviation, like I say. So we are vulnerable. There is no doubt. But I think what we need to do here is revisit the SOPs. The SOPs were created, 30 years ago. And we need to start changing with the times, with the introduction of so many social media platforms. The government, and also remember, like you mentioned, there's a multiplicity of agencies. You have the MHA, you have the MEA, you have the MOCA, you have the DGCA, you have BCAS, you have CISF, and the airlines. Now you have the social media channels. Perhaps the government should take them on board so that to quickly identify and isolate these threats. Like your reporter pointed out, there's one teenager, arrested in Bombay, and there is somebody in Chhattisgarh who's made 7 hoax calls. It's time we start imprisoning these people so that we send the strongest signal and the strongest deterrent so that you do not face any such repetition. Thanks.
Okay, so let me bring in Jitender Bhargava on that. Mr. Bhargava, do you agree with Mr. Lazar's view that the SOPs that have been drafted, which have been, of course, standard international parlance for so long, is it time to revisit those SOPs? Because at the end of the day, one can understand that there's no room for a safety terrorist, or they only need to be successful once, and it's okay if 100 flights are delayed as long as one flight does not go down with a bombing. But surely the sheer volume of these prank messages and prank calls that are coming in probably ask the question as to should we look at our SOPs as to whether they can be a bit more streamlined, a bit more up to date, to ensure that there is some way of filtering out what seems to be a needless and or very clear fake threat.
We need to be very realistic. airlines operate on zero safety tolerance basis, that you can't take a risk. If you get a call, you cannot say that, look, I'm going to continue flying. So there is a very clear SOP, whether it's an old one or a new one, but the reality is no airline would take a chance of continuing to flying once they've got a call that there is something bomb on board a flight or it has a safety risk. Now, that's having said this, the unfortunate part, as we have said, and you've made a reference to Air India being helpless about it, in the statement they made it appear, the reality is yes, because it is not something that is within the control of an airline. Now, we all know that the Ministry of Civil Aviation had a meeting with Ministry of Home Affairs and also with the Parliamentary Committee on day 3. Now, my question has been, when you got a trend of it coming in day 1, day 2, but government ought to have acted faster. And the reality is also that the investigating agencies, this Chhattisgarh juvenile person who's been arrested by Mumbai police and brought to Mumbai. Now, if he was responsible for only 3 calls, what about the others? Now, the government has probably made it known in the parliamentary committee that they've got some leads. Now, what is that? They need to put it in public domain.
Yeah.
Now, if as you alluded, that probably it was coinciding with the Canadian issue and what has happened, and simultaneously it's happened, mere coincidence. Now, if that is it, it's a serious matter. Now, the one has to be very clear that 16 hoax calls in a matter of 3 days' time not only impact passengers, the airline financially, airline flight schedules, but also India's image. That why is it that our investigating agencies have been so lethargic as not to have reached out? There is a social media, there can be a call made on telephone, etc. You've got to reach out to them. One can agree, yes, the criminals are always ahead. But as this juvenile instance is showing, he is not a criminal. He may have done it as a prank, may have done it for whatever reasons it is. But for government investigating agencies to not nab them immediately, to put an end to it, because unless the fear is brought in, what do you do about it? The ministry has, and the airlines have suggested today that let these pranksters be put on no-fly zone. Is that the only punishment? There should be much harsher punishment, a deterrent action to be taken so that nobody ever dares to it. Because airlines are paying a huge price when flight get diverted, passengers get inconvenienced, the other flight schedule get disrupted. You know, a whole lot of things are happening. So I have nothing but sympathy for the airlines at this stage. And one request to the general passengers, please remember, when a plane gets diverted, it has a bearing on the cascading effect on the other schedule. So don't blame the airline, bear the kind of delay, because the airlines themselves have been going through a difficult time.
So it's very clear coming in from the 2 gentlemen on my panel who understand the aviation industry, Mr. Lazar and Mr. Bhargav, that once a threat message or a threat call has been made, the hands of the airlines are tied and there's nothing they can do to make the process a bit simpler or easier to ensure that there are no operations which are majorly impacted, yet at the same time the threat, even as minor as 1%, is eliminated, which means then the impetus comes to then in form of not preventative but curative, to ensure that it is nipped in the bud. Let me then bring in Mr. Pawan Dugal, who is one of India's foremost cybersecurity experts. Mr. Dugal, from what we understand, the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, or the I4C, is also one of the agencies looking into and probing this entire mess that's been happening for 3 days. Our sources tell us that the caller or the people who are sending these messages are doing that through data connection that have been suppressed in multiple layers of encryption, and it requires advanced unmasking procedures to try and identify the senders and their real locations. And although they have most probably sourced flight data from open source information. Now, my point is it feasible for someone who is in Chhattisgarh or someone who's a minor to have access to such advanced technologies in terms of encryption and obscuring their whereabouts or obscuring their addresses to ensure that they can pull off such a prank and not be traced that easily?
Well, technically and practically, it's very much possible for people to start using a lot of these free tools, which are available not only on the superficial net, but also on the dark net, to go ahead and perpetuate these kinds of exercises. Today, digital users are aware of the fact that agencies will go after them. Therefore, the focus is let's try to go ahead and obliterate electronic footprints. And in that regard, they are not only using the virtual private networks, but are extensively using encryption as also artificial intelligence powered cybercrime as a service for the purposes of doing these kinds of activities. So let's be very clear. It's not an accidental call. It's not a prank. It's much bigger than that. In fact, India needs to now come up with a very stringent viewpoint on these kinds of episodes and treat them as cyber terrorism. At the end of the day, the call comes in on an electronic network. The call is in the form of a message that's ultimately aimed to go ahead and put fear in the minds and the hearts of the relevant communities of the target groups. And thereby you go ahead and disrupt the actual services of the community. So this kind of activities purely come under Section 66F of the Information Technology Act 2000, which is punishable with life imprisonment and fine. Till now, India has never really invoked the cyber terrorism angle of these kinds of calls. Well, we just take these as just routine prank calls and maybe some normal FIRs registered, but no convictions. But I think the messaging that now has to go is that India is not going to take this lying down. It's got a direct impact, not just on the security of the said aircraft, not just on the safety of the passengers, but on the security and the resilience of the entire civil aviation ecosystem. And therefore, these kinds of calls have a detrimental impact to the protection and preservation of aviation cybersecurity. It's in this regard that organizations like BCAS are doing a remarkable work. But clearly, let's realize that cyber criminals are 10 or 20 steps ahead of agencies as of today. They will extensively be misusing technologies for the purposes of disruption. The timing of these calls itself is no longer a coincidence. It could have a bigger ramification. We'll have to wait and watch.
Exactly.
But quickly, when these FIRs are getting lodged, it's time to invoke Section 66F of the Information Technology Act 2000, apart from organized crime, because this is all a part of an activity which can be classified as cybercrime, which is organized crime under Section 111 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. So a lot of work needs to be done, and we just can't say we put them on a low-fly zone. Sorry, that is a no-no. That's a given yes in any case that these kind of people, one identified, will never be allowed to fly. But India needs to go beyond. India needs to give a different message, because in the global community, the messaging that's coming out is that India is not giving the kind of importance or focus on aviation cybersecurity that it needs to do. And therefore, a stringent action, approach, and effective strategy in this regard for India as a nation shall be highly helpful, apart from giving a very strong message to the international aviation community that we are not going to take this lying down, and we will take it by its horns.
Colonel Deni, let me bring you in here, because the past two panelists have both mentioned the fact that the timing of this incident is something which I also mentioned in my opening remarks as well. That the timing in terms of the frequency of these calls, and they've all happened after we have all seen the rapid and swift deterioration of bilateral ties between India and Canada, and how things have escalated massively over this Canada's support to Khalistani separatism on its soil here. Do you agree with our fellow panelists that the timing is something which is also significant? Because while, yes, over the last few months, we have seen several cases of these prank calls and prank messages or bomb hoaxes being sent out to schools, being sent out to malls, being sent out to airlines as well. In the last 3 days, 16 calls, it all indicates that it's a bit more than usual pranksters just going about doing mischief.
Absolutely, Ritangshu. I think I agree with Mr. Pavan Duggal when he mentioned about cyber terrorism. See, it's very clear that if it's one or two, it could be prank. It could be, if it is two or three, it could be a prank with a mischievous kind of intent. But 16 in 3 days over 5 airlines definitely cannot be a prank with even mischievous intent. It is definitely with a plan and with a message being sent out, and definitely with an objective. Now, if you see, and why I say it's with the plan and with the message and objective is because of the timing. Now, if you see the timing, definitely there is an issue which is happening between India and Canada. Now, whenever there is an issue which has been talked of India and Canada, there is a Khalistani factor which comes into play. And whenever we speak about a Khalistani factor, there is the 1985 Kanishka bombing which took place. So there is a history there, and that is where I wanted to bring in Mr. Chandra Arya, the Canadian MP. He in this year's 23rd June, I think, the 39th anniversary of Kanishka bombing, he mentioned something very interesting. He mentioned that the ideology responsible for the terrorist attack which was carried out then is still alive in some of the people in Canada. So there are people who believe that such acts can be done and should be done, which was very visible. Now look at what happened about 2 days back. There were
not to mention Mr. Panon himself, Gurpan Singh Pavon has very recently indicated that he would like to carry out another repeat of what happened with Kanishka.
Absolutely, and look at what has happened. It was 2 days back. Nowhere we would have seen, even when even at the biggest of war which is happening between Russia and Ukraine, you would not find a diplomat being with a photograph with bullet marks on him, which is being displayed there in what happened in Canada. So these kind of violent, messaging is happening from Canada over a period of time. So therefore, there is a cause. Now, I'm not saying that it is definitely these are the people who are responsible, but there is definitely a cause. Now, if that cause is there are also people like what Mr. Pavan Duggal mentioned, who are likely to exploit this timing. And there, I want to take back, the attention during the CAA bill protest which happened. At that time also, the tracing of many of the tweets which led to violence in India was in the Middle East and in Pakistan. So there could well be that this particular period of timing which is there could well be used as a form of cyber warfare by people who are having anti-India feelings, or people who do not want India to grow, and there are inimical forces all around. So what I say is that definitely this cannot be a mischievous intent. It is definitely a malicious intent.
So yes, so that's what the question we are asking. Is it mischief or malice? And you are very clear at this point, sir, that this is something which is born, Colonel Delhi, that this is born out of malice. Let me go back to Sanjay Lazar. The point which Colonel Delhi was mentioning, Mr. Lazar, the fact that the timing is significant, and we cannot underestimate the fact that the factors which led to the unfortunate tragedy which we all know in 1985 they're still alive right now. Now, a lot of these flights, of the 16 flights which have been disrupted, a lot of them were international flights. And as many of our panelists have pointed out, this has brought a lot of international infamy and attention also this entire episode. My point is, at a time when Indian relations with Canada are deteriorating, Indian relations with the United States are also under strain, how does the aviation industry balance the fact that ultimately aviation is an industry which requires the cooperation of all countries involved, and if there is a lapse from a single country in terms of security and preparedness, or cooperation for that matter, it has cascading effects onto every country? Because at the end of the day, Kanishka, if I'm not mistaken, took off from Canada and was on its way to the United Kingdom. It was not neither its destination nor was its source from India at the end of the day.
Yes, I want to just take up one point on the Colonel's subject that he raised. Many people have not realized yesterday was the 15th of October. 15th of October 1992 is the day that the Punjab police shot dead the mastermind of the Kanishka bombing, Talvinder Singh Parmar in Punjab. So it cannot be a coincidence that the Canadian relations have got damaged, and a lot of these surfaced around the time it was Talvinder Parmar's death anniversary. And every year, a lot of these terrorists in Canada commemorate his death anniversary, just to point that out, since it's not been mentioned before. Yes, you're right. The Kanishka was flying from Montreal and Toronto to UK and then Delhi. And there were a lot of lapses over there. But we need to, again, I come to the point that systems and SOPs need to be tightened. I absolutely prescribe to what the other panelists say. We need to have the strongest deterrent. We need to have imprisonment, and no-fly lists are nothing. It's you can swat off like a fly. You need to have imprisonments and make examples of these people, just like you have in the United States or the UK. I'm sure many of my panelists would remember the incident of that young boy who at Gatwick just posted a message on Snapchat, I'm going to Spain, go to bomb an aircraft. And whilst he was in the air from Gatwick to Spain, to Menorca,
Yeah.
You had Air Force jets forcing him down. His family eventually paid 100,000 euro. He was arrested in Spain. They paid 100,000 euro as compensation for all the damage. So if these minors have been, or these youths, teenagers who've been arrested in Chhattisgarh and in Mumbai, have any linkage to any of these delays, I hope the airlines, whether it's Air India or IndiGo or Akasa, sue their families, because this has to be made an example of. We need to make sure that we have a deterrent that puts people not only behind bars, but puts them in the poorhouse. Security of aircrafts is so
And Mr.
important.
Lazar, not to mention, yesterday was also the day, and since you mentioned October 16, yesterday, one of those 16 flights was from Delhi to Chicago, which was diverted to Canada, to a very remote airport in Canada, and it required the escort of the Canadian Air Force in order to ensure it was safe. So the coincidences do keep building up in terms of dates, in terms of timing, in terms of locations. It is something to be taken very seriously. Colonel Delhi, very quickly, then is the solution then to not look at perhaps the intent of these pranksters, for the lack of a better word, but then look at the impact? And as Pawan Dugal has been citing, probably make an example by looking them as terrorist acts, viewing them as terrorist acts, even though perhaps on the face of it, they may have been just another prank call.
That today India has the capability to take action, and I completely go by the panelists which mentioned that we should be aggressive in this. Now, if we are being subject to cyber warfare or cyber terrorism, I think we have the capability to do the same across to the people who are doing it against us. So what I'm saying is that this is not just a few teenagers doing something. Even they could be misled, or they would be without them realizing what they're getting into.
Exactly.
So once the team who's investing it, I'm sure they will know where it is coming from. I think we should be proactive, aggressive, like what we did in other cases of terrorism, to send a message that if you do this, we are also able to do it. I think that is the only solution for this.
So how do we get proactive? I'm glad. I'm just going to make it very brisk as in terms of closing arguments. Pawan Dugal, from terms of a cyber security point of view, how do we get proactive and nip these threats in the bud before they go ahead and create mayhem?
Couple of things. We need to come up with SOPs on cybersecurity in the context of civil aviation. We need to specifically keep in mind the work that's done by the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, and then replicate the similar kinds of stuff in that regard. Already BCAS has been doing a lot of work in terms of strengthening cybersecurity, coming up with different notifications and the aviation security orders for stakeholders. But it's not just only orders. It's time to effectively enforce the implementation of those orders. And ultimately, we will have to start building in a culture of aviation cybersecurity amongst the aviation ecosystem stakeholders. Because at the end of the day, if your aviation cybersecurity gets compromised, it could have a prejudicial impact upon the sovereignty,
Absolutely.
security, and integrity of India, and could be an irreplaceable kind of an exercise. So the quicker we look at effective legal frameworks, the quicker we try to enforce existing and also the proposed legal frameworks, and the quicker we go in for capacity building amongst all stakeholders on the growing importance of aviation cybersecurity, the better it will be in terms of serving the nation and protecting its cyber sovereign interests.
And finally, I'll come to you, Jitender Bhargava, for the last word. We have been talking about how all agencies need to be proactive to nip this in the bud. Is it also time for the Civil Aviation Ministry to be a bit more proactive and assist airlines? You mentioned in your previous point that airlines are already going through a tough phase in terms of profits, in terms of operations there. And the last thing they need is to incur further ill will on part of the flyers. Because let's be honest, for most passengers who have been at the end of a harrowing story with the flight being delayed or disrupted, they're not going to go back home and watch the news as to what really happened. They're going to end up bearing a grudge against the airline and feeling that was the airline which could have done better and ended up letting them down.
Let's keep the costing or the financial profitability aside, because when it comes to safety, these things don't matter. But we are right that not only airlines, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, but more so the passengers, they got to abide by the rules and regulations, safety parameters, not try and violate those kind of things. You see, LIL is one agency, Israel Airlines. When they get a hoax call, they don't divert the aircraft, they keep proceeding because they're so confident of the security checks that they've subjected passengers to and the aircraft to. Now, can we attain that kind of a thing? Certainly not, because of work culture. whether it's the employees or
Yeah.
it's the passengers, is simply not there. So, we got to be basically having deterrence. And as I said earlier, investigating agencies must get on, though I don't fully subscribe to this Canadian angle, considering that this juvenile arrested from Rajnandgaon cannot be on the payroll of Canadian company or Canadian or Khalistanis or any one of those kind to be indulging in it. So I would ideally like to wait for the outcome. And now that the ministry has taken it on hand, NIA has been involved and all other agencies have been involved, let them come forward when they say, we've got some leads. Now let them share the leads with the airline industry. And if we do not have any instance of a hoax call tomorrow, I think this concerted action that we've seen in the last 3 days, 16 flights being impacted, will probably not be there.
Okay.
Because
So I
think
the one takeaway we can have from this discussion,
they don't give a warning, they act.
I think the one takeaway, I'm sorry, we'll have to wrap it short at this point, Mr. Bhargava, but I think the one takeaway we can all argue and agree on, and I'm very glad we have had this conversation. I think the clear takeaway coming from the panel is that even if it is not intended to be a terrorist act, even if it's intended to be some sort of a perverse form of attention seeking or getting 15 seconds of fame, it needs to be treated as a terrorist act based on its consequences, based on its implications, and only then can a strong message be sent to those who even try to do this as a prank. And if it is, God forbid, a terrorist activity or terrorist conspiracy, then the need for action is even more important and urgent. Thank you so much, Sanjay Lazar, Jitender Bhargava, Colonel Dini, and Pawan Duggal for joining us on this very, very important debate, which I hope our viewers have appreciated.